What would you do if the one thing an entire town laughed at became the only thing standing between them and a slow death in the snow? The key hit the frozen ground with a dull iron clink, bounced once against the heel of his boot, and vanished halfway into the gray slush at the edge of the auction yard. While laughter rolled through the crowd like heat from a stove he was no longer welcome to sit beside. Nobody bothered to hide it. Not the men in ranch jackets with their hands tucked into expensive gloves. Not the women who had watched him grow up and now looked at him with that cold, embarrassed pity small towns saved for men who came home from war without the life they were promised. Not the mayor standing on the flatbed trailer in his polished coat, smiling as if he had said something clever instead of cruel when he announced that the rusted key was worth less than the retired Navy SEAL bending to pick it up. He bent anyway, slow and controlled, the way men bend after years of jumps, hard landings, and fractures that never fully leave the body. The iron settled into his palm heavier than it looked, black with rust, long-shanked, strange-toothed, too large for any ordinary cabin door in Black Hollow. Beside him, his white German shepherd went completely still. The dog wore a black tactical K9 jacket over his thick winter coat, and in that instant he looked less like an animal and more like the last disciplined thing left in a town that had forgotten what loyalty was. If stories of survival, betrayal, and the kind of loyalty that does not break in the storm mean something to you, then stay with Storm Rescue Tales, because some journeys do not begin with applause. They begin when the world laughs, turns away, and only one soul beside you refuses to leave. The laughter around him thinned when the dog let out a low sound from deep in his chest, not loud, not wild, just enough to make a few men glance down and rethink the joke. The retired soldier closed his fingers around the key, rose without a word, and looked once toward the mayor, who stood above the crowd with one gloved hand resting on a stack of property papers that had just stripped another family of another piece of winter land. There had been a time when men like that used sermons, laws, and smiles to steal slowly enough that nobody could point to the exact moment it became theft. In Black Hollow, they called it planning. They called it recovery. They called it difficult decisions. But he knew what it really was because he had seen cleaner evil in places much farther from home, and somehow that made what happened here feel even smaller and colder. The mayor lifted his chin and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that maybe the soldier had finally found something he could afford. More laughter. More faces turning away when he looked at them. His dead brother's old friend did not meet his eyes. The hardware owner pretended to rearrange a tray of flashlights no one was buying. A teenage boy smirked only because his father was smirking too. The retired soldier said nothing. He had run out of words for people who smiled while they helped bury a man alive in paperwork. He turned, touched two fingers once to the dog's neck in the habit they had built years earlier under much darker skies, and started uphill through the edge of town. Snow had not begun falling in full yet, but the mountain was preparing for it. He could feel it in the pressure of the air, in the silence between gusts, in the way ravens had dropped lower over the pine line, and in the ache at the base of his skull that had once warned him about incoming mortar before his ears could hear it. Montana did not always announce danger with drama. Sometimes it simply closed its fist around a valley and waited to see who noticed. Black Hollow sat in that fist now, a mountain town of shuttered porches, boarded windows, old mining scars, and narrow roads that vanished under white faster than outsiders believed possible. The last grocery truck had come through that morning. The storm warning had already been upgraded twice. By nightfall, the mountain would belong to the blizzard. He crossed the main street without looking back, passing the diner where the same men who mocked him drank coffee every morning, the church that rang its bell for weddings, funerals, and emergencies, and the courthouse annex where his brother's signature had somehow been turned against his own blood after death. He kept walking until the town noise fell away and the higher road bent toward the ridge. That was where the old mechanic shed stood, half leaning, half frozen into the slope above Black Hollow, the last place left to him after the land seizure, the tax dispute, and the lie that he had missed a filing deadline because grief had made him careless. Grief had not made him careless. Grief had made him slow. The men who wanted his family's land had simply been faster. Inside the shed, the cold felt trapped rather than moving, sharpened by concrete, rusted tools, and walls thin enough to remember every winter. He fed the potbelly stove, coaxed a weak flame into breathing, and set the key on the scarred workbench he used as a table, desk, and sometimes pillow when sleep refused to come. The dog leaped up at once, front paws planted against the bench, nose inches from the iron object, not sniffing like an animal curious about scent, but staring in that intense stillness he had seen before only when the shepherd had detected hidden compartments, pressure plates, or men trying too hard to seem relaxed. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The dog did not move. The retired soldier wiped the key with the edge of his sleeve. A little more rust came away, and beneath it, near the head, a faint mark emerged. Not a letter. Not a number. A shape. A circle crossed by a line, with something like a mountain peak cut into the middle. He frowned. It meant nothing to him, but the dog's ears rose higher the moment the mark appeared. Outside, wind hit the side of the shed in a long low push that rattled bolts in the roof. He glanced toward the door, then back to the key, then to the dog, who suddenly turned his head and stared not at the door but through the wall, toward the north ridge above town where abandoned service roads, buried vents, and old mining scars slept under drifts deep enough to swallow a truck. He tried to laugh at himself and failed. He had spent too many years trusting trained instincts to ignore one now, even when it came from an animal. He put the key into a drawer. The dog barked once, sharp and offended, then shoved his nose against the wood until the drawer rattled. The soldier stood there for a long second, feeling ridiculous and uneasy in equal measure, then pulled the drawer open and placed the key back on the bench. The dog immediately relaxed, though he did not lie down. He only kept watching the iron shape as if it might move on its own. Dusk thickened early. Black hollow scattered lights came on below like weak coals in a dying fire, and the first real flurries began scratching at the grimy window above the sink. He opened a can of stew, heated it over the stove, and set the dog's bowl beside his own plate. The shepherd did not touch it. That bothered him more than the mayor's mockery. The dog had gone hungry before in training, on deployment, on long mountain crossings, but he never ignored food unless something else mattered more. "Eat," the man said. "Nothing." The dog stayed fixed on the key, then looked toward the ridge again. There was a knock at the door, quick and hard, almost snatched away by the wind. He rose at once, hand moving from memory before the years corrected it, and opened the door to a blast of cold, and the only person in town whose face had not changed when he lost everything. She stood there in a navy parka crusted with snow, auburn hair tucked under a beanie, one gloved hand wrapped around a metal toolbox and the other around her own elbow to stop the wind from shaking her. She said she was checking frozen pipes along the upper road and saw light through the shed wall. The lie was neat but thin. Her eyes had already gone past him to the workbench. "I heard what happened in town," she said. "The auction?" He said nothing. She stepped inside anyway after he moved aside, set the toolbox down, and walked straight to the key as if something in her had been dragging her toward it since the moment she saw him leave the square. The dog did not stop her. That alone told him enough to stay quiet. She picked the iron up carefully, rubbed her thumb across the faded emblem, and the color changed in her face beneath the lantern light. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "They threw it at me," he said. "Said it was junk." A strange look crossed her features, something between disbelief and anger. "That isn't junk." He leaned against the bench, every part of him suddenly alert. "You know what it is." She did not answer right away. She crossed to the window, looked out at the widening dark as if making sure no headlights had stopped on the road below, then came back and lowered her voice. Before working as the town locksmith, she had catalogued maintenance records for the county, the kind no one cared about until they became the difference between rumor and proof. Years earlier she had come across a sealed set of lock numbers attached to an outdated emergency infrastructure file tied to the North Ridge, pre-collapse mining era, federal support, post-disaster access. Most of the details had been removed, but she remembered the emblem because it looked too deliberate for municipal storage and too expensive for an ordinary lock system. There was a key listed in the ledger, she said finally. One master key, marked missing after the mine closed. He looked down at the rusted iron in her gloved hand, then at the dog, who had not taken his eyes off either of them. Missing from where? He asked. From a structure no one in Black Hollow talks about anymore, she said. Or pretends not to. The wind struck harder outside, and somewhere down in town a transformer cracked blue against the storm dark. He crossed to the shelf and pulled down a folded topographic map of the ridge. She set the key on the paper and traced the contour lines with one finger. There, above the abandoned North Road and below a tree line that filled with avalanche danger every bad winter, was a faded mark too small to mean much unless you already knew to look for it. This area was once tied to an emergency corridor, she said. Cold weather shelter. Service access. Maybe storage. Maybe more. Maybe more, hung between them like a door left ajar. He remembered hunting that ridge as a boy with his brother, remembered a concrete hump jutting from the snow one winter, and their father telling them not to waste time around dead utility sites. He had forgotten it until now. The dog turned toward the door and let out a low, impatient whine, as if he could hear the mountain itself breathing through the storm. If that corridor exists, the retired soldier said, why would anyone hide it? She met his eyes. Because in a town like this, the difference between survival and desperation becomes power. Warmth becomes power. Shelter becomes power. Land connected to forgotten infrastructure becomes power. And there's one man in Black Hollow who never lets power sit where other people can reach it. He did not need her to say the mayor's name. Both of them were still staring at the map when the radio on the shelf burst into static, then a clipped emergency tone. Blizzard warning. Whiteout conditions expected. Wind gusts over 60. Travel not advised. Possible extended outages. The dog barked once and slammed his paw against the door. The old lights down in town flickered through the window. Then they all went out at once, leaving Black Hollow as a cluster of swallowed shapes in the dark. The church bell began ringing below, slow and urgent, calling people toward shelter. The locksmith looked at the key. He looked at the ridge. The dog looked at both, then fixed his eyes on the man as if the choice had already been made. You're thinking about going up there, she said. You're thinking the same thing. It's suicide in a blizzard. If that place is real and the town's emergency heat fails, it could be the only thing up there stronger than this storm. He did not move. For one hard second the weight of the day pressed on him all at once. The auction, the laughter, his brother's land, the cold, the dog, the key, the old shame of being driven out of his own town like a man too broken to matter. Men like him were always easier to mock before disaster. Easier to dismiss before they became necessary. He took a slow breath, folded the map, and slipped the key into his coat. Then we go now, he said. The locksmith stared at him, surprised by the speed of the answer. You're serious? He was already pulling rope, gloves, med kit, pry bar, and headlamps from the wall. Once the drifts stack, that ridge closes. She set her jaw, nodded once, and picked up the extra lamp. Neither said what both understood. If they were wrong, they would find nothing and nearly die for a ghost. If they were right, then someone in Black Hollow had been sitting on a buried lifeline, while the town above froze one winter at a time. The dog reached the door before either of them. When the soldier opened it, snow came in sideways. Wind hit like a fist. Below them, the church bell kept ringing through the dark, and above them the mountain vanished into white as if it had been waiting all day to hide the truth. The storm took them the moment they stepped off the road and onto the old cut trail above Black Hollow, as if the mountain had been listening from the dark and decided that anyone climbing toward its buried secrets would have to earn every foot in pain. Wind came hard across the open slope, flattening breath, needling exposed skin, driving snow sideways so fast it felt less like weather and more like sandblasting ice. The retired soldier clipped a line between himself and the locksmith for the first stretch and let the white German shepherd lead, not out of blind hope but because he had learned long ago that a trained dog sometimes read danger faster than any instrument did. The shepherd moved low and purposeful, head shifting with the currents, one moment cutting left around a drift, the next pausing to test the air with that eerie stillness that never meant confusion, only calculation. Behind them, Black Hollow had already begun to disappear. The church bell still rang, but softer now, swallowed by wind and distance until it sounded like memory more than warning. The lower cabins blurred into a few weak yellow lights and then into nothing at all. Ahead, the ridge was only shape and pressure, a white wall where old timber roads, forgotten vents, and buried concrete scars slept under years of snowfall no one had any reason to disturb. He checked his bearing by headlamp, counted paces between half-buried markers he had not seen since boyhood, and felt the old part of himself returning as the climb steepened, the part shaped by frozen mountains, silent approaches, and missions where turning back was sometimes smarter than moving forward but rarely easier. The locksmith stumbled once when her boot vanished to the knee, and before he could tighten the rope the dog had already turned back, pressed his shoulder against her thigh, and held there until she found balance again. Even in a blizzard, even with the dark closing down, the animal never broke discipline. That steadiness mattered more than either of them said aloud. Men failed in storms because fear made them rush, guess, deny what the mountain was telling them. The shepherd did none of those things. He advanced only when he was certain, and that certainty became the thin line pulling them uphill through a world reduced to white breath, black trees, and the shriek of wind against the ice. At the first old timberline post, the soldier brushed off enough packed snow to confirm the route. The post leaned at an angle now, half-rotted, the faded paint almost gone, but it was where it should be, which meant the old service spur could not be far. The locksmith bent, hands on her thighs, lungs fighting the altitude and the cold. "We should be close," she shouted through the gale. He nodded once, though his eyes were not on the post. They were on the dog. The shepherd had frozen again, one front paw lifted, muzzle pointed away from the visible trail and toward a drifted rise above a cluster of wind-beaten pines. "That's off the cut," she said. "Maybe not anymore," he answered. Then the dog surged forward and started digging. Snow blasted behind him in white arcs. Not random scraping. Targeted excavation. Fast. Violent. Precise. The soldier dropped beside him and drove the shovel down, feeling the top layer powder away before the blade struck something hard. Stone. He cleared faster. Under the drift, a marker emerged from the mountain waist-high, old, its face nearly swallowed by ice and lichen, but still carved with the same emblem as the key. A circle. A line. A mountain peak in the center. The locksmith knelt in the snow, gloves shaking as she brushed the symbol clean. "This is it," she said, but there was no triumph in her voice, only the shock of suspicion becoming solid under her hand. The soldier widened the dig around the marker, searching for any sign of a hatch, a seam, a vent, a lock, but found only frozen rock packed hard by years of slide and wind. It looked less like an entrance than a warning. The dog had already moved on. He climbed another 15 yards through waist-deep drifts, weaving through the pines until he stopped so abruptly the rope between the humans tugged tight. He stood against a rounded bank of snow that appeared completely natural until he pressed his nose into it and let out a low whine that raised the hair on the back of the soldier's neck. He dropped beside him and shoved his bare glove through the drift. 3 inches down, the cold changed. Beneath the powder he felt the rigid edge of metal and, stranger still, a thread of air warmer than the storm moving over his knuckles. He dug with both hands until a circular grate emerged, iced over, rust-flecked, and still breathing faintly from whatever hidden system lay beneath the ridge. The locksmith's headlamp caught the rim, and beneath the frost they could just make out old, industrial paint. "Ventilation," she said, voice thin with disbelief. "There's something active down there." The dog spun away from the grate so suddenly that both humans flinched. He stared downslope into the white and barked once, sharp and urgent. Headlamps flashed through the trees below. 3 beams. Spaced apart. Climbing fast. The soldier killed his lamp immediately, and pulled the locksmith behind the drift. Snow hissed over them. Through the trees came voices broken by wind but clear enough to know who carried authority, who carried obedience, and who carried fear. The mayor. One deputy. One road foreman. Not a rescue team. Not men searching for stranded townspeople. Men coming straight for the ridge as if they had known exactly where to look. The soldier lay still, snow collecting along his sleeves and collar, and watched their lights sweep toward the hidden grate. "I know you're up there," the mayor called into the storm, every word sharpened by command and long habit. "This area is restricted. Step out before someone gets hurt." Restricted. Not abandoned. Not rumor. Not dead utility junk. Restricted. The word settled over the ridge harder than the wind. Beside him, the locksmith turned her face toward his, and even in the whiteout he could see the truth landing in her eyes. "He knows," she whispered. "He's always known." The mayor's beam crossed the drift again. "You hear me?" he shouted. "This is municipal emergency property." The dog gave a soft growl. The soldier touched the dog's shoulder once, not to silence him, but to tell him to hold. He could have remained hidden. He could have let them search and reveal what they feared by the shape of their movements. But some instincts were stronger than strategy, and one of his was this. Once a bully believed he controlled the room, sometimes the quickest way to break that control was simply to stand up. He rose from behind the drift, snow falling from his shoulders, key heavy in his pocket, the white dog beside him looking like a ghost pulled out of the storm itself. The locksmith stood a second later. The mayor's light snapped onto their faces. For one brief beat surprise cut through his performance. He had not expected witnesses. He had certainly not expected the town locksmith to be one of them. Then the practiced expression returned. "You are trespassing on secured infrastructure," he said. "Turn around. Go back to town. The church is open. The school has cots. We have emergency protocol in place." "Then why hide this?" the soldier asked. No shouting. No anger. Just a question laid down flat and hard enough to make the deputy glance away. The mayor drew his coat tighter. "Because unstable mountain structures are not for civilians to wander through in a blizzard." "It doesn't look unstable," the locksmith said. "It looks ventilated." The road foreman shifted his weight. The deputy's beam dropped momentarily to the grate, and then back up as if even looking at it too long made him complicit. The mayor ignored them both. "You need to leave," he said to the soldier, voice losing polish now. "You especially." The old insult sat there in the snow between them. "You are not one of us, not anymore, not since you came home too late, and too damaged and too alone to stop men like me from rewriting the town in my image." The soldier had heard quieter versions of that sentence for months. In glances. In closed doors. In phone calls not returned. In the legal language that turned his brother's land into public necessity and unpaid penalties. "You used my brother's death to move those boundary lines," he said. The mayor's face did not change much, but it changed enough. "Your brother signed what was put in front of him. He trusted who put it there." Wind drove harder through the trees. Snow filled collar gaps and stung eyes. The shepherd moved forward 3 steps and placed himself directly over the vent, head low, ears locked on the mayor. Every man on that ridge saw the message in the dog's posture. Nobody touches this. The mayor took a step anyway, anger finally punching through his careful mask. "Call off your dog." The soldier did not. The dog let out a deeper growl, a sound with no panic in it at all, only trained warning. Enough. The deputy actually stepped back. The road foreman turned his face aside. The mayor stopped because for the first time since climbing the ridge he had encountered something he could not bully with paperwork or public shame. "Listen to me carefully," he said, now speaking to the soldier the way men speak when they think old rank might still own another man's instincts. "State plows are already en route. The town is handled. You don't get to turn this into one of your war stories because your pride is bruised." The insult landed clean, and for a second the soldier felt the old heat rise, not because the words were sharp, but because they were spoken where his brother was not alive to answer them, and where the whole ridge itself had become proof that pride had nothing to do with what was buried here. Then lightning flickered somewhere beyond the pass, turning the storm blue for one hard heartbeat, and in that flash the soldier saw something he had missed before. The mayor's boots were dusted not just with snow but with a pale dry residue around the welt and heel seams. Concrete dust. Fine and gray. Fresh enough not to have been washed away by slush below town. Underground dust. He looked from the boots to the hidden vent to the man's eyes and understood at once that this was no old rumor rediscovered by accident. The mayor had been down there. Perhaps today. Perhaps many times. The breath that left the soldier then felt less like anger than certainty. "You've used it," he said. The mayor did not answer. He did not have to. The locksmith saw where the soldier was looking and followed the line to the same conclusion. "How many winters?" she asked, voice breaking with disgust. "How many times did you keep this from people?" No answer again. Only the wind. Only the dog's growl. Only the deputy's silence, which was worse than a confession because it meant more than one man had known. Then the shepherd snapped his head uphill and barked twice, loud and urgent. At first the humans heard nothing except the storm. Then it came, a deep cracking noise above the tree line, like timber splitting inside the mountain. The soldier's body reacted before thought. He knew that sound. Wind slab. Loaded snow giving way. "Move!" he shouted, but the avalanche was already breaking loose above them, and in the same second the mayor lunged not for the others, not for the deputy, not for the road foreman, but straight toward the snow-covered vent as though instinct had finally admitted what every lie in town had been hiding. The avalanche did not arrive like a clean white wave from a movie. It came apart in violent pieces, as if the whole mountain had reached a breaking point and decided to drop its fury all at once. The crack above the ridge became a roar, and then the slope exploded. Snow slabs sheared loose from the upper face, smashed through the pines, and thundered downward with a force so sudden that human voices vanished inside it. The retired Navy SEAL lunged toward the locksmith on pure instinct, drove his shoulder into her ribs, and threw both of them behind the half-buried rock beside the hidden vent just as the first blast of snow hit the ridge. It felt less like being covered and more like being struck by a collapsing wall. Snow punched into his back, filled his collar, shoved ice down his sleeves, blinded him, deafened him, packed against his legs with suffocating weight. Beside him the locksmith cried out once and then disappeared into the roar. Somewhere to his left the deputy screamed. Somewhere farther down the road foreman shouted a prayer that the wind tore apart before it finished. The mayor made no sound at all. The dog did. Not a bark, not fear, but one sharp explosive warning, followed by the thud of a body hitting another body hard enough to change fate by inches. Then everything turned white and heavy and blind. The avalanche swept past in surging layers, the force of it shaking the ridge under his knees, and for a terrible handful of seconds the retired soldier felt that old battlefield certainty return, the knowledge that survival sometimes had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with where your body happened to be when violence chose a direction. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the main force passed downslope, leaving only the hiss of settling powder, the groan of overloaded branches, and the fierce sound of his own breathing trapped inside a pocket of ice-choked air. He spat snow, forced one arm free, then the other, and clawed upright through the debris. The ridge no longer looked like the ridge. The trail was gone. The drift line had changed shape completely. Trees that had stood upright seconds earlier now leaned broken at impossible angles, and the vent area was buried beneath a fresh white mound hard as stone. "You alive?" he shouted, turning instantly toward where he had thrown the locksmith. A muffled answer came back from his right, angry and coughing, which was all he needed. He dropped to his knees and dug with both hands until her shoulder, face, and then whole upper body broke through the snow. She sucked air with a ragged gasp, one glove gone, hair full of ice, eyes wide with shock but alive. "I'm fine," she lied. "Good. he said, because they did not have time for anything softer. He spun downslope. Call out! This time the deputy answered first, his voice choked and weak. The dog surfaced beside him at almost the same instant, exploding from the drift in a spray of snow, front paws already striking fast at the mound pinning the deputy's chest. Relief hit so hard it almost unsteadied the soldier. The white German shepherd was coated in powder from muzzle to tail, tactical K9 jacket half buried, ears flat, eyes blazing with that cold professional focus the retired soldier had seen in firefights and disaster zones. The dog had thrown himself into the deputy at the exact second the slab broke, and now both of them were half buried but breathing. The retired soldier plunged down the slope toward them, the locksmith behind him, boots punching through fresh debris. The deputy's left arm was trapped under his own body and his shoulder sat wrong beneath the jacket, but his airway was clear. The shepherd kept digging until the man could move enough to spit snow and suck in a full breath. Can you stand? The soldier asked. The deputy nodded once, face white with pain. Shoulder. I know. Together they hauled him into a kneeling position. The road foreman answered next from farther downhill, buried nearly to the waist in the slide debris, one leg twisted badly beneath him. The mayor still said nothing. That silence turned the ridge colder than the storm. The locksmith looked uphill toward the vent and then back down at the altered debris field. He went for the entrance, she said, already knowing. The retired soldier swept his light across the buried mound where the vent had been. For 1 second he saw nothing except churned snow and shattered branches. Then came the sound. 3 heavy metallic bangs, close together, muffled from beneath the fresh drift. Not from downhill. Not from a body under open snow. From inside something hollow. The locksmith's head snapped toward the sound. There, she said. Below us. The soldier moved at once. The dog moved before him. The shepherd bounded uphill, sank chest deep into the new mound, then began digging with violent precision at a spot just beyond where the circular vent had been. Snow flew behind him in hard white bursts. The soldier hit the drift with his shovel, clearing wide and fast, while the locksmith clawed at the edges with her bare hand until the pain forced her to switch. Another metallic bang sounded from under the snow, then a muffled voice, full of panic now, stripped of every ounce of mayoral calm. Open it! Open the damn thing! The road foreman stared uphill, breathing fast through clenched teeth. The deputy muttered something under his breath that sounded too much like a curse and too much like a prayer. Beneath the drift the shovel struck metal. Not the rounded grate this time. A flat surface. The soldier cleared more snow until the square outline of a steel hatch emerged beside the vent housing, something that had been invisible before the avalanche stripped away the covering drift and exposed part of the access structure buried into the rock. A wheel latch sat frozen on the surface, and beneath it, rimmed with ice, was a recessed lock cylinder. The locksmith stared at it, and then at the retired soldier's coat pocket. Either of them spoke. They did not need to. He pulled the rusted key free. Even covered in snow and ice, the iron looked ugly and wrong and ancient in his hand, a thing everyone in town had mocked because mockery was cheaper than curiosity. Behind them the church bell in Black Hollow had gone silent. Above them the storm kept raging. And beneath the steel hatch the man who had called the key worthless was now pounding from inside the very place he had hidden. The retired soldier slid the iron into the lock. It fit with the kind of certainty that made every doubt die at once. He turned it. Deep inside the steel, old mechanisms shifted, then caught, then released with a heavy clunk that seemed to vibrate through the entire ridge. The wheel fought him at first, frozen partly by years and partly by cold, but he braced, set his boots, and hauled until the seal cracked and the hatch jerked open just enough for a blast of stale warm air to push out into the blizzard. Warm. Real. Impossible to deny. He pulled harder. The hatch swung wider, revealing a narrow ladder shaft dropping into yellow emergency light and concrete walls below. Halfway down the ladder hung the mayor, one leg twisted awkwardly between rungs, coat torn, face gray with terror. For one humiliating second he looked less like a ruler of small-town fate and more like any frightened animal caught in a trap he thought only he controlled. The retired soldier reached down automatically, grabbed the front of the mayor's coat, and hauled him upward with the kind of rough strength that came from training and anger working together. The mayor spilled onto the snow, coughed once, then scrambled clear of the opening on hands and knees. The locksmith leaned over the shaft with her headlamp. Concrete. Painted directional arrows. Utility conduit. A sealed corridor beyond. Not a rumor. Not a dead mine utility access. A live underground emergency complex buried beneath the ridge while Black Hollow froze above it one winter after another. The deputy stared at the opening as if the mountain itself had confessed. The road foreman's mouth hung partly open despite the pain in his leg. The mayor dragged in air, then immediately reached for command again, because men like him mistook authority for oxygen. "Close it," he snapped, voice cracking. "Right now." The retired soldier looked down at him, then passed him toward the shaft. "There are people freezing in town. And they'll freeze faster if this turns into panic," the mayor said, trying to stand, failing, then forcing himself upright anyway. "You don't understand what's down there. Try me. It is not public shelter. It was federal contingency infrastructure tied to the old mine contract. Liability, sealed inventory, unstable sections, legal exposure, the locksmith repeated, disgust turning her voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "That's what you're thinking about." The mayor rounded on her. "If this gets opened without process, every land designation tied to the North Ridge is thrown into dispute." That was the moment even the deputy understood. His face changed first. Then the road foreman's. The retired soldier felt the shape of the truth settle in full. This had never been only about emergency planning. It was about ownership. Buried fuel. Buried shelter. Buried federal structures. Land made more valuable by secrets no one else knew existed. His brother's property line had not been stolen just for taxes or spite. It sat too close to something important. "You buried the town for this," the retired soldier said quietly. The mayor's silence answered better than words. The dog stood over the hatch lip now, snow still clinging to his white fur, chest rising hard, eyes locked not on the opening but on the corridor below, as if he could smell a second truth deeper inside. He let out a low warning growl. The retired soldier angled his light down. There were fresh scrape marks around the inner frame, not old rust scars, but recent metal wear. Dust smudged along the ladder rungs. A footprint below where dry grit had not yet been disturbed by tonight's storm. Someone had been using this place. Recently. Not just the mayor. Someone else. The locksmith saw it too. "This isn't just hidden," she whispered. "It's active." Another gust slammed the ridge, driving snow sideways into the open shaft. The deputy staggered, close to shock now. The road foreman was turning blue around the mouth. Whatever truths waited below could not be solved while they froze to death above the hatch. The retired soldier made the decision the way he had made decisions under fire, fast, clean, without asking permission from men who had lost the right to give it. "We go down," he said. The mayor actually stepped toward the opening as if to block it. The dog snapped his head toward him and bared just enough teeth to stop him cold. The retired soldier did not even look at the mayor when he spoke again. "You can help us or you can explain later why your boots already knew the way." The mayor's face went hard with hatred, but he stepped aside. The locksmith clipped a line around the road foreman's chest and lowered him first while the deputy, wincing with his bad shoulder, braced from above. The narrow shaft swallowed light and breath alike. The foreman cried out once when his injured leg struck a rung, then disappeared below. The deputy followed next, trembling, every ounce of his earlier certainty stripped away by pain and the sight of the hidden refuge under his own town. The locksmith went after him with the headlamp between her teeth. The mayor hesitated only until the wind screamed through the broken ridge again, and reminded him that his power did not extend to blizzards. Then he descended too, awkward and silent. The dog went next without fear, paws finding the rungs with practiced confidence, tactical jacket brushing steel, white coat glowing under the emergency lights like something unreal. The retired soldier came last. Before entering, he looked once over his shoulder at Black Hollow below, though the town was almost gone now, its lights swallowed, its roads erased, its people gathered in church basements and schoolrooms believing the mayor had told them everything they needed to survive. Then he climbed down and pulled the hatch partly shut behind him against the storm. The sound changed at once. Wind became a muffled distant howl above steel. Warm stale air closed around them. Concrete walls reflected their breath and their footsteps. Emergency lights flickered weak but steady along a corridor stretching into the mountain. On one wall, beneath layers of dust, old painted words still showed through, North Contingency Access. The locksmith read them aloud, almost under her breath, as if speaking too loudly might wake whatever history had been buried down here. The road foreman sat against the wall clutching his leg. The deputy leaned beside him, pale and shaking. The mayor would not meet anyone's eyes. And the dog, who had been right from the first frozen second in the auction yard, moved 10 feet down the corridor, stopped at a sealed steel door on the right, and growled softly at the fresh marks around its lock because the hatch they had opened was not the only secret under the snow. The corridor swallowed the last sound of the storm the moment the hatch sealed above them, and that silence felt stranger than the avalanche had, because men could prepare for violence but not always for the quiet that followed it. The retired Navy SEAL stood at the bottom of the ladder with one hand still on the steel rung, chest rising hard, letting his eyes adjust to the jaundiced emergency lights running along the ceiling every 20 feet. The underground passage was narrower than he had imagined but far more intact. Concrete walls. Exposed conduit. Painted arrows faded by time but not erased. A red emergency phone box hanging crooked beside a junction panel. Dust on everything, yet not enough dust. That was what bothered him first. Hidden places abandoned for decades settled into stillness differently. This place had stillness, yes, but it also had interruption. Boot marks. Scuff lines. A smear on the wall where a gloved hand had touched recently. On the floor near the sealed side door the dog was growling at. The dust had been disturbed in a clean half-moon pattern, as if something heavy had been opened and closed within the last day or two. The locksmith saw it as well and lowered her voice even though no one beyond them had spoken. "Somebody's using this section." The deputy, pale with pain and adrenaline, leaned his shoulder against the wall and stared down the corridor as if he had walked into a hallucination. The road foreman sat on the concrete with his injured legs stretched in front of him, snow melting off his boots into a dark spreading patch, his face shiny with shock. The mayor said nothing. He had regained enough color to stand straight again, but there was no command left in his posture now, only calculation, the kind men carried when their secrets had been torn open and they were already searching for the least damaging lie. The retired soldier stepped away from the ladder and moved toward the side door where the shepherd stood rigid, white fur tipped with melting snow, black tactical K9 jacket dark against the concrete like a military shadow that had somehow survived the war and followed him home. The dog's nose hovered near the seam, not sniffing wildly but tracking with precise intensity. He knew that behavior. He had seen it before doors rigged with explosives, before caches buried in walls, before men hidden in tunnels trying not to breathe. "What is it?" he asked softly. The dog's tail stayed still. His ears did not flick. He kept his eyes on the seam and let out another low, warning rumble. The soldier swept his light over the lock assembly. Fresh scraped marks ringed the cylinder. Not many. Just enough to say it had been opened recently by someone careless or rushed. The mayor finally found his voice. "That section is probably unstable." The locksmith turned and looked at him with such open contempt that he glanced away first. "You know," she said. "You know exactly what's behind that door. I know enough to understand that panic gets people killed." "No," the retired soldier said, still studying the lock. "Panic happens when people discover they've been lied to while they're freezing." The mayor's jaw tightened. The deputy said nothing, but his silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of a subordinate waiting for direction. It was the silence of a man replaying every winter briefing, every shelter plan, every controlled reassurance he had ever heard from the same mouth, and trying to figure out when loyalty had quietly become complicity. The road foreman wiped melted snow from his eyelashes and looked from the corridor to the mayor. "You told us the backup heat at the church could carry all night." The mayor did not answer him either. The retired soldier crouched beside the foreman, checked the leg with quick practiced hands, and confirmed what the man's clenched jaw already knew. "Bad fracture, maybe worse. I can splint it, but he needs warmth and he needs to stay still." The locksmith immediately dropped beside him to help, opening the med kit with fingers still numb from the ridge. Together they cut away the lower pant leg, wrapped the ankle and shin, and braced it with scavenged metal strips from an old maintenance shelf nearby. The foreman bit down on his glove to keep from shouting. The dog left the side door only when the man cried out, stepping over to stand beside him until the splint was done, as if part of his job was now simply to make sure nobody fell apart underground. "There should be a main operations room somewhere deeper in," the locksmith said while tightening the wrap. "If the ventilation is still active, there's power beyond these emergency lights. Maybe a generator." The retired soldier nodded and looked down the main corridor. Painted arrows pointed ahead towards storage, north access, and mech. He had spent too many years in buried infrastructure, half-finished outposts, hardened compounds, and forgotten service tunnels not to read the logic of places like this quickly. Entrances never mattered as much as circulation. Ventilation. Heat. Control points. Safe rooms. Whoever designed the complex had not intended it as a simple storm shelter. It was built for continuity, for waiting out disaster in isolation, and that meant supplies. Maybe enough supplies to save Black Hollow if they could get people here in time. The thought hit him so hard he straightened at once. Above them, the town still believed the church basement and school gym were the only options. If the heat failed there, people would start losing children first. Then the old. Then the sick. Montana did not kill everyone loudly. Sometimes it just took the weakest in order and let the rest live with it. The locksmith saw the same calculation cross his face. "We need to get word back. Not until we know the path is clear," he said. "No point leading families into a trap or a collapse. Then we split up." "No." The answer came too fast, too flat. He did not apologize for it. Splitting underground in an active, unknown complex with an injured man, a compromised deputy, a lying mayor, and signs of recent access was how people disappeared. The mayor folded his arms as if trying to recover some shred of authority. "The right move is to seal the hatch and wait for state rescue." The deputy finally looked at him fully. "Did state rescue know about this place?" The mayor said nothing. "Did emergency management?" Still nothing. "Did the church know their backup heat wasn't enough if the power stayed down?" The mayor's eyes flashed, but his answer, when it came, was aimed at the room rather than the deputy. "You think one hidden tunnel fixes everything? You have no idea what legal chain this place sits inside. Federal stock, insurance restrictions, contamination reviews. People don't care about your paperwork when the pipes freeze inside them." The locksmith snapped. The retired soldier let them talk while he examined the side door. The dog had been right to flag it. The metal along the frame was slightly warmer than the surrounding wall, which meant some kind of airflow or active system beyond. There was a locking wheel but no visible key slot on this side. Instead, a panel to the left had been pried open recently. Wires. Manual override. He traced the conduit upward and found where someone had spliced around an old safety latch. "This door's been bypassed," he said. The mayor's face changed again. Not enough for anyone else to miss it this time. "What's behind it?" the locksmith asked him. "Storage," the mayor said. "Then why would a storage door need a manual override?" No answer. The dog planted himself in front of the seam again and scratched once, then went still. The retired soldier stepped back, looked down the corridor, and made the decision. "We move to operations first. Find generator control." Radio if possible. Heat status. Secondary exits. Then we come back to this. The locksmith nodded. The deputy nodded too, though his face tightened when he shifted his bad shoulder. The foreman grimaced and said he could manage if they moved slow. The mayor started to object, but the retired soldier cut him off with one look, the kind that ended arguments before they formed. He had not used that stare in years, and it unsettled him how naturally it returned. They got the foreman onto his feet between them and started down the corridor. Their footsteps echoed strangely, not hollow enough for abandonment, not busy enough for occupation. Emergency lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere deeper in the complex a mechanical pulse rose and fell, the steady distant heartbeat of old systems still doing their job. They passed a row of sealed locker alcoves, an equipment cage with empty hooks where cold weather suits had once hung, and a wall map behind cracked glass showing a simplified layout of the northern ridge. The glass was too frosted with age to read clearly until the locksmith wiped it with her sleeve. The map confirmed what she had suspected and what the mayor had hidden. This was not one corridor but a small network. Main access shaft. Mechanical room. Storage chamber. Secondary emergency route descending toward the old church lot. A service tunnel branching toward the rail depot. And one section marked only with a black box and 3 faded letters that could have been VU or maybe AUX, the rest blurred away by time. The dog stopped at the map and stared up at the black box for a beat, then moved on. The retired soldier memorized what he could. Secondary route to the church lot. That mattered most. If it was intact, they would not need to drag half-frozen families up the ridge through a blizzard. They could bring them in from below town itself. Unless, of course, the mayor had already sealed that route too. They turned a bend and found the operations room. The door stood ajar. That alone froze the group where they stood. Doors in buried emergency complexes did not stand ajar by accident. The dog moved first, silent now, posture changing from warning to hunt. He slipped through the opening without a sound. The retired soldier followed half a step behind, one hand lifted to halt the others. Inside, old monitors sat dark on a metal desk beneath a wall of dead switches and schematic boards. A bank of backup batteries hummed weakly under the far panel. A portable lantern sat on the desk. Not ancient. Newer than everything else. Beside it, a half-empty thermos. A fresh one. And next to that, a pair of reading glasses folded on an open ledger someone had been using recently. The room smelled faintly of coffee. Warm human coffee. Not old dust. Someone had been here within hours. The dog circled the desk, then stopped at the rear door and looked back once, sharply. The rear door was closed. Unlike the front entrance, its handle gleamed where the paint had been rubbed by recent hands. "We're not alone," the locksmith whispered. The foreman swallowed audibly. The deputy reached for the sidearm he was not wearing because in Black Hollow deputies rarely climbed avalanche ridges expecting buried tunnels and secret rooms. The mayor said too quickly, "There's probably no one here now." No one believed him. The retired soldier crossed to the main console and began flipping through the open ledger. Fuel checks. Vent cycles. Heat calibration. Maintenance notes written in 2 different hands. One older, careful, official. One recent, hurried, inconsistent. Dates hidden or torn from the top corner pages. But enough remained to show usage through the last 3 winters, maybe longer. This place had not simply been inspected. It had been occupied in bad weather. Chosen. Used while the town above suffered with whatever scraps it had been given. The locksmith moved beside him, scanning the pages. "You kept a private refuge," she said without looking at the mayor. "Not private," the mayor said. "Protected." The deputy gave a short, humorless laugh that sounded like something inside him cracking. The retired soldier ignored them and examined the schematic board on the wall. One line still pulsed green on emergency current. North vent. Another flickered weakly beside CH lot access. The route to the church lot. Not dead. Blocked? Partially active? Hard to tell. He traced the line with one finger. If they could reopen that path, they could move people from the church basement underground without exposing them to the ridge. He turned to tell the others, and the rear door handle slowly began to move from the inside. Every person in the room saw it. Even the mayor stepped back. The dog did not bark. He lowered his head, shoulders tightening under the black K9 jacket, and positioned himself exactly between the retired soldier and the rear door as the latch gave a soft metallic click. The door opened 2 inches, then 4, then enough to reveal darkness beyond and the shape of someone standing there listening to their breathing. For one long second nobody moved. Then a flashlight beam snapped on from inside the dark room, blindingly bright, and a voice from behind it said, "You were never supposed to find this place." Just before the dog lunged forward and the entire underground refuge seemed to wake into a second disaster far more dangerous than the storm above. The dog hit the door before the man behind it could finish stepping through, a white blur and black tactical harness exploding across the concrete in total silence until impact drove the stranger backward into the dark room beyond with a grunt that sounded more shocked than pained. The flashlight flew from his hand, struck the wall, and spun across the floor in a wild circle of light that flashed over steel shelves, stacked crates, old ration tins, fuel drums, folded cots, and the astonished faces of everyone in the operations room all at once. The retired Navy SEAL moved in on pure reflex, closing distance before the stranger could recover, one hand grabbing the edge of the door, the other catching the man's wrist just as he reached for something at his belt. It was not a gun. It was a ring of keys and a compact radio. The stranger was older than the soldier expected, maybe late 60s, hard-faced and hollow-cheeked, wrapped in insulated overalls under a faded maintenance parka with a miner's lamp clipped to the chest. His beard was gray, his eyes bloodshot, and his body smelled of diesel, coal dust, and the deep stale air of places where a man lived too long without sunlight. The shepherd pinned him flat with both front paws against his ribs, teeth bared inches from his throat, not biting, not panicking, just holding him in perfect trained stillness while the retired soldier twisted the radio free and kicked the flashlight out of reach. "Call him off," the old man rasped, staring not at the soldier but at the dog as if that was the true force in the room. "Tell me why you're here," the soldier said. "You already know why. Say it." The old man looked past him toward the mayor standing frozen in the doorway, face drained of color. Recognition hit every person in the room at the same time, only not evenly. The locksmith knew first from the ledgers. The deputy knew second from a memory he could not place until then. The road foreman knew last from one muttered curse. Years ago, after the mine collapse, there had been one maintenance supervisor who refused the public hearings, one man who disappeared before the compensation audits, one man people said had taken his silence and run south. He had never run anywhere. He had gone underground. "You," the foreman whispered. "We buried 6 men because of that collapse." The old man did not deny it. He only kept staring at the mayor with the flat hatred of someone who had served another man's greed for too long to stop hating himself for it. "I told him this day would come," he said. The mayor took one step back. "Don't start performing now." "Performing?" the locksmith snapped. "You hid a living bunker under a freezing town and stocked it while people above ground trusted you with shelter plans." The old man laughed once, a dry, ugly sound. "Shelter plans?" he repeated. "That's good." The retired soldier did not remove his grip from the man's wrist. "How long have you been down here?" "Long enough to know the storm over your head isn't the worst thing in this mountain." That sentence hung in the room colder than anything else. The dog pressed down harder, reading the tension before anyone did. The soldier's eyes narrowed. "Explain." But before the old man could answer, the radio in the soldier's hand crackled alive with a burst of static and a voice above ground, broken by interference, desperate and young. "Church basement to anyone on emergency line, boiler's dead. I repeat, boiler is dead. We've got children losing heat. If anyone hears this, answer." The words ripped through the room and destroyed whatever time remained for careful questioning. The deputy swore under his breath. The locksmith's face changed instantly from anger to action. The foreman shut his eyes for one hard second, as if seeing his own nieces or neighbors in that freezing basement. Even the mayor looked shaken now, though whether from guilt or fear of exposure the soldier could not yet tell. He snatched the dog back with a single command, and the shepherd released pressure at once but stayed poised over the old man, every muscle ready. The retired soldier lifted the radio. "This is North Access. Hold everyone together. Keep them off the floor. Layer the children in the center. We may have a route to move you. How many are inside?" "Static." "Then, 43. Maybe more. Generator failed 10 minutes ago. We can't get the side doors open." Drifted shut. The soldier shut his eyes just long enough to picture it. Church basement. Stone walls. Failing body heat. Panic rising in the adults before the children understood enough to be afraid. 43 people was too many to lose and too many to move blindly without a plan. He looked at the map again. Lot access still flickered weakly. "We're coming," he said into the radio. "Keep the strongest adults awake. No one sleeps." He handed the radio to the locksmith. "Stay on them." Then he turned back to the old man on the floor. "You said the storm isn't the worst thing in this mountain. Talk now." The old man pulled in a breath and glanced once more at the mayor. "The lower tunnel is compromised." "Compromised how?" "Partial collapse 3 winters back. Gas pockets in the deep vent zone. Generator room still works, but the church access was blocked after the second cave-in." The locksmith cut in sharply. "Then why is the church line still showing active?" "Because he kept part of it clear." The old man jerked his chin toward the mayor. "Not enough for the town. Just enough for himself." The deputy stared at the mayor as if trying to understand whether he was looking at stupidity or evil. "You maintained a private escape route?" The mayor's expression hardened at last, shame finally burning off into something colder. "I maintained controlled access to a dangerous structure. There is a difference. To the children freezing upstairs, there isn't," the retired soldier said. He hauled the old man to his feet. "Can the church route be opened?" "Maybe," the old man said. "Not from the church side. From the service break below it. But the collapse shifted the support wall. You open it wrong, the whole side passage drops." "Show me." The mayor spoke then, loud and sharp. "You do that and you kill them faster. None of you understand the pressure load in those tunnels." The old man turned on him with more life than he had shown since being pinned. "I understand them better than you ever did. I built half the reinforcement after your cost cuts cracked the first support grid." Silence again. The room seemed to contract around that admission. Cost cuts. Not accident. Not bad luck. Not just a buried refuge. The mine disaster that scarred Black Hollow had not been clean tragedy. It had been engineered by greed long before tonight. The foreman sat straighter despite the pain in his leg, all color gone from his face. "My brother worked that shaft," he said, voice barely audible. The mayor did not look at him. The retired soldier did not let the room drift into rage. There would be time later for truth, or law, or public ruin. Right now there was only cold, children, tunnel load, and whatever route the dog had sniffed before any of them understood the scale of the lie. "We move," he said. "Foreman stays here with the deputy." "I can still walk," the deputy said. "You can barely breathe without wincing. Still more use than sitting beside him." The soldier measured him once and nodded. Pain was not the same thing as weakness. "Fine. But you follow orders." He looked at the old man. "You lead." Then at the mayor. "You come too." The mayor stiffened. "Absolutely not." The dog turned his head toward him, and somehow that was enough to end the argument before it began. The locksmith stayed on the radio as they moved, guiding the church volunteers through survival basics in a voice that was steady because panic had no right to live there. The old man led them through the rear chamber and down a narrower maintenance corridor lined with supply racks and rusting extinguishers, his lamp clipped back on now, throwing a pale cone of light over concrete dust and old stains. The dog ranged ahead and back, never drifting far from the soldier, nose working constantly, reading air currents, dead ends, and hidden gaps the humans could not sense. Twice he stopped at branching alcoves and rejected them without hesitation. Once he froze at a cracked section of wall and backed away on his own, hackles rising, and a second later a rain of fine concrete grit hissed down from the ceiling. "Good boy," the soldier murmured, one hand brushing the thick fur at the dog's neck in passing. The tunnel dropped lower. The air changed. Warmer in some pockets, strangely bitter in others, carrying the metallic tang of old machinery and the faint rotten edge of trapped gases rising from deep rock. The old man pointed ahead. "Generator room on the left. Service break past that. Church access beyond the support bend." The maintenance corridor opened into a large mechanical chamber full of dead panel boards, fuel tanks, and one rumbling backup generator that seemed to be keeping the whole buried refuge breathing by sheer stubbornness. Warm air blew from ducting overhead. Light was brighter here. Hope tried to rise with the heat, but the soldier did not let it. Machines underground were promises only until they failed. The dog crossed the generator room in a straight line, ignoring the warmth, ignoring the open aisle, and stopped at a steel utility hatch low in the far wall. He scratched once, then looked back. The old man frowned. "That goes nowhere useful. Just a crawl space for pipe access." The dog scratched again, harder. The retired soldier went to the hatch, swept his light over it, and found fresh marks on the lower edge. Not old maintenance scars. New abrasions where it had been opened recently from the inside. He looked at the old man. "You said nobody else was down here?" "I said nobody was supposed to be." The mayor said nothing, but in the bright mechanical light sweat had begun to show at his temples despite the cold. The locksmith noticed too. "Who else uses this place?" she asked. Still he stayed silent. The soldier opened the hatch. Beyond it lay a cramped dark crawl lined with pipes and old cable trays, just large enough for a man to move through on elbows. Warm air drifted through from farther in. The dog lowered himself without waiting and began crawling into the dark. "Ghost." The shepherd paused, looked back once, then continued, forcing the soldier to make the choice instantly. Trust the dog or waste time arguing with whatever system of lies had survived this long underground. He dropped to one knee, shoved the light into the crawl, and saw what the dog had already known. The pipe passage ran not randomly but parallel to the block church access corridor, and up ahead where the tunnel bent, a dim amber light flickered through a crack. A hidden bypass. Small. Dangerous. But real. He looked over his shoulder. "This is the way." The old man swore softly. The mayor's face went slack with a kind of helpless fury. "No," he said. "That section was sealed." "By whom?" the locksmith asked. Nobody answered because in the next second the radio burst alive again with screaming from the church, a child crying, adults shouting over each other, and one desperate voice yelling that the basement windows were icing from the inside. The dog vanished deeper into the crawl space without another sound, and the retired soldier dropped flat after him, knowing now with absolute certainty that the dog had found something the mayor had hidden even from the men who helped him keep the town in the dark. And whatever waited at the other end of that narrow steel throat was the difference between 43 people surviving the night or becoming the kind of lost black hollow would never stop paying for. The crawl space was barely wide. Enough for a man in winter layers, and within the first 6 feet the retired Navy SEAL understood why it had been hidden from the main route. It was not a real passage in the public sense. It was an afterthought carved between necessity and deceit, a maintenance throat running beside the block church corridor, just large enough for pipes, cable, and one desperate body to squeeze through if he knew exactly where to look. The steel beneath him was cold enough to bite through his sleeves, old dust coated his gloves, and every forward pull dragged the smell of rust, machine oil, warm duct air, and trapped stone deeper into his lungs. Ahead, the white German shepherd moved with complete certainty, black tactical K9 jacket brushing against the pipes, claws ticking softly over narrow braces as he slid through the cramped dark with the patience of something built for tight places and silent work. Behind the soldier, The locksmith came next with the radio clipped to her collar, then the deputy gritting through pain and confined air, then the old maintenance man, while the mayor stayed back in the generator room because for once in his life he could not force himself through the consequences he had built. The soldier did not care whether the man followed or fled. Right now only the living route mattered. The radio crackled again somewhere behind his shoulder, voices layered with static and fear, the church volunteers trying to keep children awake, trying to stop older people from slipping into that quiet, dangerous stillness that always came before the body let the cold win. "Talk to me," the soldier called back without stopping. The locksmith's voice came thin through the steel tunnel. "They've got frost building on the inside walls now. One woman collapsed. No pulse for a few seconds, then weak again. They're wrapping the little ones in choir robes and altar cloths." The image landed like a blow. Church basement. Stone floor. Breath turning white and then vanishing. 43 lives gathered in the place the town trusted most, while the only real shelter had been hidden under their feet for years. The dog froze ahead so suddenly the soldier nearly slid into him. "What is it?" he whispered, though whispering meant nothing in that steel throat. The shepherd lowered his head and angled his nose toward the right wall where a narrow seam no wider than a knife line ran behind an insulated pipe cluster. Warm air leaked from it. Not the broad, controlled warmth of the generator duct, but sharper, more immediate, touched with human scent. The soldier pressed one cheek to the metal and peered through the gap. At first he saw only darkness. Then movement. A flicker of light. A concrete surface beyond. He pulled back and felt along the seam until his glove found a recessed latch hidden behind a cable bracket. Recently used. The edges were rubbed clean of dust. "There's a service panel here," he said. The old maintenance man, somewhere behind the deputy, exhaled a curse full of equal parts shame and astonishment. "That wasn't on the original grid." "No," the locksmith said. "It was added." Everyone understood by whom. The soldier braced his shoulder against the pipe, forced his fingers into the hidden release, and shoved. The narrow panel gave with a screech of metal on metal and opened inward into a dark maintenance break wide enough for one person at a time. Warmth spilled through at once. The dog slipped through before anyone could stop him. The soldier followed and dropped into a low concrete side passage that ran parallel to the main church access corridor behind a reinforced wall. It was cramped, unfinished, full of support braces, old tools, and patched cable bundles, but it was real, and more importantly it had been used recently enough that footprints still marked the dust. Not many. One said heavy, deliberate adult male. Another smaller, hurried, maybe from someone carrying supplies. He swept his light down and saw where the passage bent left toward a steel barrier that should not have existed on any public plan. The hidden bypass did not just run beside the church route. It controlled it. The whole purpose of this secret throat was now obvious. Someone had built a private way to reach the church line without opening the full passage for the town. A filtered route. A controlled lifeline. An emergency advantage reserved for one man and perhaps a chosen few. The old maintenance man crawled out after them, glanced once at the reinforced wall, and shut his eyes in disgust. "He had us pour this after the second collapse," he said. "Said it was for structural separation. It was for ownership," the locksmith answered. The deputy emerged next, face slick with sweat from pain in the crawl, but when he saw the hidden barrier his expression changed from exhaustion to something colder. Betrayal always looked different on a man when it finally took shape in concrete. "All those years," he muttered. "All those winter briefings." The soldier ignored the bitterness for now and moved toward the barrier. It was not a cave-in. It was deliberate. Steel frame. Manual lock wheel. Reinforced plate. Fresh scraped marks where it had been opened in recent storms. Beside it ran a narrower hatch, knee-high, likely for supply transfer. Ghost was already at the base of the plate, nose pressed into the seam at floor level, tail stiff, shoulders tight. Then he did something that made every human in the passage go still. He whined once, sharply, then pawed at the small hatch. Not at the main barrier. At the little hatch near the ground. Someone's on the other side, the soldier said. The deputy instinctively reached for a weapon he did not have. The locksmith lifted the radio but lowered it again when they all heard it, not machinery, not settling concrete, but a faint human sound from beyond the plate. A cough. Then another. Small. Weak. The soldier dropped to one knee, brought his mouth close to the hatch seam, and called out. Who's there? Nothing for a second. Then a child's voice, hoarse and frightened. It's cold. Every muscle in the soldier's body locked. He looked up at the others. The locksmith had gone white. The old maintenance man stared at the barrier as if it had turned into a grave. How many? The soldier shouted, louder now. A pause. Whispering. Then the same child again. 3. The dog let out a deep sound that was not a bark and not quite a growl either, something more wounded than angry. The soldier moved instantly. He spun the small hatch wheel. Locked. He went to the main barrier and tried that wheel. Also locked, but not fully seized. Keys? He said, turning toward the old man. The old man shook his head. Not mine. They all looked at the deputy. He looked at the mayor, who still had not crawled through. The locksmith snapped on the radio. You stay with them. She told the church basement, voice tight but controlled. We've found a route. Hold on. Then she turned and crawled back toward the generator room faster than seemed possible with the cold, and the steel and the fear. The soldier stayed at the barrier, one hand resting on the dog's back to keep him from tearing at the hatch with his teeth. Talk to them, the old maintenance man said quietly. Keep them awake. So the retired SEAL crouched in a hidden side tunnel beneath Black Hollow, while a blizzard buried the world above and spoke through steel to 3 unseen children trapped somewhere beyond a secret barrier the town had never been meant to know existed. He asked their names, then remembered halfway through the first answer that names made fear too real, so he stopped asking and started telling them what to do instead. Rub your hands together. Keep talking to each other. Stamp your feet if you can. Are you alone? No. A teacher was there. She was not waking up. The words struck harder than the avalanche had. These were not random strangers trapped in a forgotten chamber. Somehow, in the panic after the church boiler failed, people had been moved or had fled into the wrong lower access point, and the hidden barrier had turned them into a sealed pocket. The dog kept his muzzle against the seam and made soft sounds back to them, tiny reassuring huffs that changed the child's breathing almost immediately. There's a dog, the voice whispered from the other side, astonished. Yes, the soldier said. He found you. He heard the teacher then, or perhaps another adult, scraping weakly against the floor, trying and failing to rise. The old maintenance man ran his hand over the barrier frame, face hard with memory. This plate doesn't belong here. It was installed after the collapse reports. Secondary control gate. We can force it if the upper pins are cut. Can you do it? Maybe. But it will scream like hell, and if the support wall behind it shifted, the whole thing could jam halfway. Halfway is better than closed. The deputy finally found his voice again. We need the mayor. Nobody wanted that to be true, but it was. If the man had controlled this route, he had the keys or the override sequence. Seconds later the locksmith came crawling back, breathing hard, snow still melting from her hairline, fury in every movement. He had them, she said. Inside his coat. 2 ring sets. She tossed one to the old maintenance man and one to the deputy. He's not coming. The deputy stared. What? He tried to leave through the operations room. The retired soldier looked up sharply. Leave where? There's another lower route. Ghost was right. He panicked when I called him on the keys and bolted for the rear passage. For one brief second rage rose hot and dangerous through the underground air, but the soldier forced it flat. Let the man run. Let him find out whether buried lies still recognized his authority. Right now there were children behind steel and a whole church basement losing heat by the minute. The old maintenance man tested the first key ring, then the second. The third key on the smaller set fit the supply hatch. It turned halfway, caught, then completed with a hard metallic thunk. Warm, stale air pushed through the seam. The dog barked once, loud enough to startle everyone. The soldier grabbed the hatch and yanked. It opened only a foot, blocked by debris or a drift on the far side, but through that gap he saw what lay beyond, the lower church access pocket, partially collapsed, snow blowing through cracks somewhere above, and 3 children huddled under a fallen emergency blanket beside an unconscious woman in a church coat. The dog was through the hatch before the humans could even speak. He squeezed his body into the gap, dropped to the other side, and went straight to the children, standing over them like a white wall with a heartbeat. One of the children began to cry, not from fear now but from the kind of relief that hurts. "Good," the soldier said, already shoving his shoulders toward the gap. "Now let's open the rest of the way." The old maintenance man jammed a pry bar into the main plate seam. The deputy took the upper edge one-handed despite the agony in his shoulder. The locksmith braced low. Together they hauled against the hidden barrier while the dog, beyond the steel, stayed with the children in the freezing dark, because once again the turning point in Black Hollow did not begin with a politician, a plan, or a promise. It began with the one creature in the mountain who had never lied to anyone. The hidden barrier came free a fraction at a time, shrieking against its frame like something furious at being forced to reveal what it had been built to conceal, and every inch they won felt stolen from the clock that was already running too fast above them. The retired Navy SEAL jammed his shoulder beside the deputy's, boots slipping in concrete dust, while the old maintenance man leaned his full weight into the pry bar and the locksmith braced low near the lower hinge, face white with strain and cold, and the radio clipped to her collar hissing fragments of panic from the church basement behind them. Metal groaned. One upper pin snapped with a sharp crack. The barrier shifted another 3 inches. Beyond the widening gap, the white German shepherd stood over the 3 children in the half-collapsed pocket, tactical K9 jacket dark against the pale fur, body angled protectively toward the gap as if he understood exactly which direction danger would come from and exactly where hope had to enter. The unconscious woman beside them had rolled partly onto one shoulder, one arm stretched across the nearest child even in collapse, and the soldier could see frost collecting along the edge of her hair where snow-laced air leaked in through fractures above the pocket. "Again," he grunted. They hauled harder. The main plate jumped another inch, then stuck. The deputy cursed through clenched teeth as his injured shoulder almost gave way. The old maintenance man repositioned the pry bar and shouted for the locksmith to pull the lower wheel release. She spun it with both hands. Nothing. She kicked the plate near the lock housing, tried again, and this time something disengaged inside the frame with a heavy internal knock. The soldier drove his weight forward at the exact second the dog barked once from the far side, and the barrier finally lurched wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He went first without hesitation, twisting sideways into the collapsed access pocket, knees hitting broken concrete and crusted snow. Cold air hit him at once, harder than the tunnel cold, because this chamber had been losing heat directly into the mountain through a fracture somewhere overhead. The 3 children stared at him with that dazed frozen look he had seen before in disaster zones, beyond crying, beyond panic, balanced on the thin dangerous line where the body begins to slow itself to survive. "Look at me," he said, voice flat and steady. "You're getting out." The dog lowered his head and nudged the smallest child gently toward the opening. The woman on the floor had a weak pulse and dangerously cold skin, but she was alive. He stripped off one glove, checked her airway, then looked at the children again. 2 girls. 1 boy. Old enough to be afraid, too young to hide it. "Can you crawl?" he asked. The boy nodded. 1 girl nodded after him. The smallest one only clung harder to the dog's neck. "Good," the soldier said. "Then listen carefully. You go through the opening one at a time. There are hands on the other side. They won't let you fall." The dog stayed with the smallest child until the older 2 had been passed through first. The locksmith pulled the first girl into the side passage, then the deputy dragged the boy through despite his shoulder nearly buckling. The old maintenance man took the second girl, wrapped his coat around her, and shoved her toward the warmer tunnel. Only then did the dog back the smallest child gently toward the gap, refusing to move ahead of her even when she buried both fists in his fur. The retired soldier got one arm around the unconscious woman, and one shoulder under her weight. "Go," he told the dog. The shepherd moved through with the child practically hanging off his jacket handle, and for a second the soldier saw what the town above had not yet seen, the image that would break every lie once daylight touched it. The mocked outcast veteran's dog, white as the storm itself, leading frozen children out of a buried pocket behind a secret barrier hidden under their own church. He forced the thought away and dragged the woman toward the opening. It took all 4 adults to get her through. Once they had her in the side passage, the locksmith snapped at the radio for the church volunteers to keep talking, keep moving, keep the children stomping feet and slapping arms, because they had found a lower route and they were opening it. "How long?" someone pleaded through the static. She looked at the soldier. He looked down the side passage at the barrier they had just breached, and then at the map burned into his memory from the operations room. "Not long," he said, and he said it with enough certainty that she repeated it exactly that way. The old maintenance man crouched by the barrier frame, running his lamp over the structure with mounting disbelief. "This wasn't just a control gate," he muttered. "He reinforced the collapsed zone behind it." "Meaning?" the deputy asked. "Meaning the main church access probably still exists beyond here. He didn't abandon it. He narrowed it." The soldier saw the whole ugly design at once. A public route had been turned into a controlled choke point. Wide enough to move select supplies, maybe select people. Narrow enough to deny the town full use. He looked down at the unconscious woman as the locksmith checked her breathing again. "Who is she?" One of the children answered now, stronger because warmth and rescue had started pulling them back. "Teacher," the girl whispered. "She told us not to stay in the basement because the air was getting bad. We found stairs behind the storage room." Then the door closed. The old maintenance man went still. "Behind the storage room?" he repeated. "There was never supposed to be an open stair there. Unless someone opened it," the locksmith said. Nobody had to name the man again. The soldier rose. "How far to the actual church line?" The old maintenance man pointed beyond the cracked support bend. 50 yards maybe. If the collapse didn't kill the main corridor completely. Then we open it." The deputy, jaw set with pain and fury, nodded before anyone asked. They moved fast. The children and the teacher were sent back through the crawl route toward the generator room, escorted by the old maintenance man and the dog for the first 20 feet until the smallest child refused to let go of the dog's harness. The shepherd stood there 1 second, eyes cutting from her to the soldier, waiting for instruction. "Take them," the soldier said. "Then come back." The dog left at once, guiding them through the passage with that same impossible calm that had led them to the ridge. The soldier turned to the main church line. The narrowed passage bent left around a bulging wall scarred by old settling cracks and newer steel reinforcement. Beyond it, under layers of dust and spalled concrete, lay the original corridor. The collapse had not sealed it completely. It had buckled the ceiling near the center, dropping debris into a jagged mound that blocked normal movement, but still left a crawlable channel near the right side. Worse, frigid air spilled through from farther on, proof that the church lot end had not only survived but remained connected to the surface somehow. "If we clear enough for 1 adult at a time, we can reach the church basement door from the tunnel side," the locksmith said. "If it's still there." The soldier grabbed a shovel from the maintenance cache and started digging at the debris slope without another word. Concrete chunks. Packed snow. Broken support board. Dust filled the air with every strike. The deputy, one-handed, dragged larger pieces aside. The locksmith worked low, clearing the crawl gap. Every few seconds the radio spat out some new fragment of fear from the church above, another child fainting, an old man no longer speaking, someone trying to force an exterior door that had frozen shut. The soldier kept his breathing even and his strokes efficient, because this was no longer about discovery or betrayal. It was about throughput. How fast could he turn a hidden tunnel into a survival route? 10 minutes later he had his answer. Not fast enough. The debris still jammed knee-high across the whole corridor, and the ceiling above the break looked ready to shed another layer if they hit it wrong. He stepped back, chest heaving, and looked for the dog even before he realized he was doing it. Ghost was already there. The shepherd had returned soundlessly, fur powdered with dust now instead of snow, eyes bright and fixed not on the main debris pile but on the right wall where an old utility conduit vanished behind a bent mesh panel. He scratched once, then looked back. The locksmith saw it too. No way. The soldier ripped the mesh free. Behind it was not empty wall but a narrow service trench running alongside the collapsed corridor, half filled with cable conduit and cold air, barely human-sized, invisible unless you were on your knees and looking for what did not belong. The dog dropped into it immediately and disappeared up to the shoulders before turning his head back toward the soldier, as if asking the same simple question he had been asking since the auction yard. Well? The retired SEAL almost laughed from pure disbelief, but there was no time for that. That's our route, he said. The deputy shone his light into the trench. That is not a route. That is a coffin. It's a way through, the soldier answered. And right now that's the same thing as hope. He dropped to his stomach and slid into the trench after the dog. The steel edges tore at his sleeves. Cable brackets dug into his ribs. The passage smelled of old dust, mouse nests, frozen mud, and the bitter mineral breath of stone. Ahead, Ghost moved steadily, never rushing, choosing each foothold like a guide with a map no human could see. Twice the soldier felt the trench narrow until his chest barely cleared. Twice he nearly backed out. Both times the dog pushed forward and the cold draft ahead strengthened, and that was enough to keep him moving. After what felt like far more than 50 yards, the trench rose sharply and opened behind a warped maintenance grate. Through its slats he saw dim light, rough stone, stacked hymn books, and the inside of the church basement storage room. He had come up under the church itself. He tore the grate loose and shoved into the room just as a woman outside screamed that the little ones were going blue. He kicked the storage door open, and 43 freezing people turned toward him at once, faces hollow with cold and fear, not understanding what they were seeing. He must have looked like he had crawled out of the mountain. Dust-covered. Bleeding at one elbow. Eyes hard with urgency. And behind him, emerging from the broken grate in a spray of dust and white fur, came the dog they had heard but not believed in, the white shepherd in the black tactical jacket, stepping into the church basement like the answer to a prayer no one in Black Hollow had known how to say correctly. On your feet, the retired soldier shouted. There's a heated tunnel below us. We move now. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Then one of the rescued children from the lower pocket stumbled into view behind the dog and cried out. He found us! And the entire basement broke into motion. The basement did not move like a crowd. It moved like fear finally given direction. 1 second the church shelter was a room full of shivering bodies, frozen breath, and the dead stare of people starting to lose hope. The next, it became a living surge of hands reaching for children, blankets thrown aside, adults stumbling up from pew cushions and hymn boxes, old men forcing stiff knees to straighten, mothers clutching babies under coats, teenagers dragging the weak toward the broken storage room door as if the floor itself had opened and offered them one last chance. The retired Navy SEAL did not waste a single word on comfort. Comfort could come later if they survived. Small children first. Injured next. Nobody runs. Nobody goes alone, he shouted, voice flat and carrying. Years of command came back to him without effort now, stripped clean of rank and ceremony until only the useful parts remained. Keep your hands on the person in front of you. If you can walk, you help someone who can't. The room obeyed because cold had burned away every social layer that usually slowed people down. Nobody cared anymore that the man giving orders was the same man mocked at the auction that afternoon. Nobody cared that the white German shepherd in the black tactical K9 jacket looked like something unreal stepping through dust and candlelight out of a hole in the mountain. They cared that he had appeared when the heat died. They cared that one of the children already clinging to the dog kept saying through chattering teeth, He found us. He found us. And in a dying basement, that was enough to become truth. The locksmith came through the trench next, then the deputy, bruised and pale and still fighting his shoulder, and together they turned the storage room into a funnel. The trench itself was too small for the whole shelter population. But now that the soldier had confirmed the tunnel line from below, they no longer needed the crawl space for everyone. They only needed it once, long enough to reopen the blocked access corridor from the church side. "Storage stairs," the old choir director whispered suddenly, pointing with a shaking hand toward a metal utility door half hidden behind stacked tables. "Those weren't opened before." The retired soldier understood at once. The hidden lower stair the teacher and the children had found. He crossed the room, yanked the tables aside, and hit the door with his shoulder. It opened inward onto a narrow concrete landing coated in frost. Beyond it, a descending passage dropped into darkness and hard cold. The town had been sitting over the tunnel network the entire time, and never knew it because someone had ensured the path looked like junk storage and locked maintenance trash. "Ghosts," he said, and the white shepherd bounded down the steps without hesitation. That was the only proof he needed that the way held. He turned back to the room. "This is the route. 2 lines. Right side children. Left side adults helping the weak. Stay moving." One of the church volunteers, a broad woman with frost in her hair and a baby under her coat, stared at him as if she were still trying to catch up to reality. "Where does it go?" "Somewhere warm," he said, and for the first time that night he heard hope move through people like a current. The first wave started down the steps. The deputy took the lead below with a flashlight and his one good arm. The locksmith stayed at the top counting, organizing, pushing back panic before it spread. The soldier moved through the basement one final time, checking corners, calling names into the dark, making sure nobody had curled up somewhere quiet to vanish alone. He found an old man behind the Sunday school cabinet barely conscious and carried him out. He found a teenage boy trying to hold his dead phone toward the ceiling as if signal might be stronger at the edge of despair, and shoved him gently toward the line. He found the teacher who had tried to save the children now wrapped in coats, and beginning to stir in the storage room under the watch of 2 older women. The dog returned from below, ran once around the room, then stopped beside the final cluster of children as if conducting them himself. They followed him more easily than they followed adults. Of course they did. Animals had not lied to them all winter. When the last group started down, the church bell above gave one broken half-ring, then silence, as if even the old building understood its part in the night was over. The soldier was the last one to leave the basement. He stood for one breath in the emptying room and looked around at the frost climbing the stone walls, the abandoned blankets, the candles burning low in jars, the signs of how close Black Hollow had come to losing people before dawn. Then he shut the storage door behind him and descended into the tunnel with the town at his back. Below, the movement became harder and more dangerous. The hidden stair did not open into the warm main corridor the way he wanted. It dropped into the half-cleared church line behind the original collapse bend, which meant every person had to be guided around debris, through narrowed concrete, and past the breached control gate where the mayor's secret had been torn open. But now they had numbers, and numbers in a tunnel could save or kill depending on how they were handled. So the soldier broke the evacuation into pulses. 10 through. Pause. Count. 10 more. He stationed the locksmith at the stair base to regulate the flow, the deputy halfway down the church line to keep people moving past the damaged wall, and the old maintenance man at the barrier into the warmer side passage to receive them and steer them toward the generator room. The dog floated where he was needed most. Sometimes at the front coaxing terrified children through the dark. Sometimes beside the oldest evacuees, slowing his pace to match shaky knees. Sometimes doubling back toward the church stairs to escort the next wave when fear made the dark feel too tight to enter. The animal never hesitated. More than once the soldier saw grown adults calm down simply because the white shepherd turned his head and waited for them. That was the thing about loyalty when people saw it with their own eyes. It did not need explanation. It rearranged a room all by itself. The first 20 evacuees made it through the line in under 8 minutes. The second group slowed when a woman carrying an infant lost her balance near the collapsed mound, and a loose section of cracked concrete dropped from the wall, exploding dust across the passage. Panic rippled instantly. Someone behind her screamed. Another person tried to turn back. The soldier was there before the collapsed dust settled. "Eyes on me," he barked. "Nobody turns. Nobody stops. The mountain wants confusion. Don't give it any." He took the infant from the mother, handed the baby to the locksmith, and physically guided the woman past the choke point. The dog planted himself in the middle of the passage until the line steadied again. 50 years of corruption and grief had nearly ended in a church basement because one man believed control mattered more than community, and now that same community was crawling through the bones of his secret, while the mountain tried to crush the route shut behind them. The symbolism would have been poetic in daylight. Underground, it was just exhausting. By the time the third wave reached the generator room, the warm mechanical air felt almost holy. Old cots were dragged out. Ration blankets came off shelves. Water drums were cracked open. The teacher regained consciousness and started crying before she even knew why. Children who had stopped speaking began to ask questions all at once. The foreman, still laid up with his splinted leg, helped direct people toward the warmest wall spaces with the authority of a man who knew every family in town and suddenly had no interest in pretending neutrality anymore. The deputy, white-faced and trembling from pain, still refused to sit down. He counted heads with the obsession of someone trying to earn back every winter he had trusted the wrong man. 38. He called after the fourth wave. "Need 5 more. The soldier looked toward the church line. "I'll get them." "I'm coming," the locksmith said. "No. Stay here. If the last wave brings trouble, they'll listen to you faster." She wanted to argue, but one look at the room full of frightened townspeople convinced her he was right. He turned and went back into the tunnel with the dog already at his side. The final 5 were the hardest. 2 elderly sisters who refused to leave without a tin box of photographs. A teenage boy who had gone back for his father's oxygen bag. A woman in early labor fighting contractions she tried to hide because in towns like Black Hollow women were taught to apologize for pain. And one man who had spent the whole first half of the evacuation swearing this was all a trick until he nearly collapsed halfway down the stairs and finally admitted he could not feel his feet. The soldier got them moving one by one, and every return trip made the church line feel more unstable. Concrete dust fell more often. The cold draft sharpened. Somewhere deeper in the ridge came the low grinding complaint of shifting weight. The mountain was reminding them that secrets buried too long never came out clean. On the final trip back from the church basement, with only the photo box left to retrieve, the dog stopped dead at the barrier and turned his head toward the far main corridor leading away from the generator room. Not toward the evacuees. Not toward the church. Toward the deeper tunnel where the mayor had fled. Then came the sound. Not loud. Just a metallic slam far away, followed by the dull cough of a door seal engaging somewhere in the lower complex. The dog's ears went high. The soldier's stomach tightened. The mayor. He was not running blind. He was still trying to control the structure. The retired SEAL delivered the last evacuees to the generator room and did the fastest count of the night. 43 from the church shelter. 3 rescued from the sealed pocket. The teacher. The volunteer women. The deputy. The locksmith. The foreman. The old maintenance man. Enough to call it a rescue, not yet enough to call it safe. Because the moment the head count stabilized, the lights in the generator room flickered once, twice, then dimmed to half strength. Voices rose immediately. Children clung harder to blankets. The locksmith looked up at the humming fixture panels. What was that? The old maintenance man had gone pale. He stared toward the mechanical controls. He's doing something. What? The deputy demanded. The old man swallowed hard. There's a lower isolation switch. Built for fire or gas breaches. If he closes the wrong sector doors and starves the upper vents, this whole north side loses heat circulation. The soldier did not even wait for the sentence to finish. He looked down at the dog. The dog was already staring into the dark lower corridor, body angled forward, ready. "Stay with them," he told the locksmith. "If the heat drops again, pack everyone tight to the generator wall. You're not going alone." "I'm not." He rested one hand for a brief second on the dog's neck. The shepherd leaned into it once, and then stepped forward. Behind them, in the generator room, the people of Black Hollow finally understood the shape of the truth. The man they had mocked had brought them out of the cold, and the man they had trusted was still somewhere in the buried dark trying to decide whether saving himself mattered more than keeping them alive. The lights flickered a third time, dimmer now, and in that failing yellow glow the soldier and his white German shepherd disappeared down the lower tunnel toward the part of the mountain where lies had been stored like fuel, knowing that the rescue was not actually over yet. The rescue had only reached the place where justice began. The lower tunnel felt different from every other section of the buried complex, and the retired Navy SEAL knew within the first 20 steps that this was where the truth had been kept longest and cleanest. The air was drier here, touched not just with dust and machinery but with that dead, sealed smell of rooms opened only by people who believed no witness would ever follow them inside. The emergency lights were weaker too, farther apart, casting long bands of yellow across concrete walls stained by decades of cold and old mineral seepage. Somewhere above and behind him, 43 townspeople and the last scraps of Black Hollow's trust were gathered around the generator room trying to believe the warmth would hold. Ahead, the white German shepherd moved with his head low and ears locked forward, black tactical K9 jacket rising and falling with each silent breath, not tracking fear now but intent. The dog had shifted into that other mode again, the one that always made the soldier's skin tighten because it meant they were no longer searching for shelter or survivors. They were hunting a human decision before it killed people. The lower corridor sloped gently down through the mountain, past sealed bulkhead doors marked with old hazard paint and warning plates eaten by rust. Service isolation. Vent control. Auxiliary storage. None of it belonged in a town that had spent 20 years pretending it barely had enough budget to keep a church boiler alive through December. Every door they passed was a monument to the same lie. The soldier kept one hand on the wall map, memory burned into his head, and the other near the pry bar clipped at his pack, moving fast without running because underground concrete punished haste more cruelly than snow ever did. Twice the dog paused at intersections and chose left without hesitation. Once he stopped dead at a thin crack under a bulkhead and backed away before the soldier heard the faint hiss of bad air leaking through, a sharp chemical edge buried under the dust. Gas pocket. The old maintenance man had told the truth about that at least. The soldier marked the route in his mind and moved on, because there was no time to fear what the mountain might do later, while the greater danger was still human and moving. The lights flickered again. This time the drop lasted longer. For 3 full heartbeats the lower tunnel went almost black except for the pale ghost of the dog ahead, and the beam of the soldier's flashlight cutting through the dark. Then the emergency current returned, weaker than before. Somewhere behind him people would have felt that flicker like a hand around the throat. Somewhere ahead, the mayor was doing it on purpose. He reached the first controlled junction and found the evidence in plain sight. The steel cabinet hung open, lock cut, panel exposed. 3 sector switches had been thrown manually. Upper vent bleed reduced. Church line reserve cut. North access heat priority shifted away from the generator corridor and deeper into the lower sealed chambers. Someone was redirecting warmth to a part of the complex no one above needed while starving the side where the evacuees waited. The soldier read enough of the old labels to understand the intent even if the exact engineering was a tangle. It was not sabotage and blind panic. It was triage twisted by selfishness. Save the hidden lower sector. Let the upper shelter weaken. Let the town depend on whatever scraps remained. The same logic all over again. He reset the first switch, but the second was locked in place by a brass latch not original to the panel. Modified. Controlled. Personal. The dog growled low and moved on before he could force it. That meant only one thing. The man he was chasing mattered more than the box in front of him. The soldier left the control cabinet open and followed. The corridor widened into a lower operations ring cut straight into the heart of the ridge. Here the complex changed character entirely. Gone were the practical lines of public shelter design. This section had been arranged for occupancy. Better lighting, though dimmed now. Newer shelves. A folding cot with blankets. Stacked bottled water. Cases of canned food. Extra diesel containers. A radio bank far more modern than anything in the upper operations room. Someone had been living in parts of this lower sector during storms, maybe for years, maybe every winter the town above was told to make do with church pews and failing generators. The sight struck harder than anger should have by that stage of the night. It was not just greed. Greed was simple. This was ritualized abandonment. Someone had eaten warm meals under the mountain while Black Hollow rationed soup and prayed over space heaters. Someone had stood in front of those radios and listened to blizzard warnings while children above town were tucked under coats in cold basements. The dog stopped at the edge of the room and scanned, nose cutting the air. The soldier crouched beside him and saw the clues at once. A mug still warm enough to fog faintly. A chair shoved back in haste. A desk drawer hanging open. Papers scattered where someone had yanked out only the pages that mattered most. Flight, but not yet escape. He moved to the desk and swept the beam over the remaining documents. Fuel transfer notes. Inventory lists. Old topographic overlays showing property lines before and after the mine closure. Then a thinner folder left half under the lamp base, as if grabbed and dropped in the same panicked motion. He opened it, and the shape of Black Hollow's stolen years finally lay bare in hard copy. Boundary amendments tied to emergency access protection zones, quiet reassessments, tax pressure maps, seizure recommendations, names of properties targeted for acquisition near the North Ridge, including his brother's land, highlighted in red because they overlaid buried tunnel segments and ventilation rights. There it was, neat as any war crime ever printed in a clean office. The mountain had not simply hidden a shelter. The shelter had become the motive for taking half the ridge around it, parcel by parcel, misfortune by misfortune, one grieving family at a time. The soldier felt something in him go utterly still. Not rage. Not yet. A colder thing. Proof. The dog's head snapped up. Footsteps. Fast. Metal on concrete. Farther down the ring. The soldier stuffed the folder under his arm and moved. The lower corridor beyond the operations room opened into a sequence of connected chambers, each more revealing than the last. A private sleeping nook. A supply alcove stocked with winter meds and portable heaters never issued to the public. A radio room tuned to county emergency frequencies. And finally, at the end of the ring, a heavy bulkhead standing half open beside a stair descending deeper still toward a lower vehicle exit. Snowcat route, he realized. An emergency egress built into the mountain so select occupants could leave without ever touching the town they governed. The dog surged ahead. The soldier heard the mayor before he saw him, breathing hard, muttering to himself, wrestling with another steel wheel at the base of the stair. Then the mayor looked up into the beam, and for the first time that night there was no performance left in his face at all. Only fury, fear, and the naked exhaustion of a man who had built his whole life on secret control and suddenly found himself standing in the middle of its exposed machinery. "Stop right there!" he snapped, one hand still on the wheel. The retired soldier kept walking. The folder under his arm felt heavier than the key had hours earlier. "You cut heat to the upper shelter. I balanced the sectors. You don't understand how this place functions. I understand exactly how you do." The mayor's expression hardened. "If those people flood this lower ring, the whole structure becomes unmanageable. Fuel disappears. Supplies disappear. Order disappears." "Order?" The soldier glanced once at the stocked rooms behind him. "You mean your order? The one where the town freezes while you pick who deserves the warm side of the wall. I kept this place intact. You kept it hidden. From chaos. From witnesses." The dog moved one step farther down the stair, body low now, silent, impossible to ignore. The mayor finally looked at him and some fragment of superstition broke across his face, because even liars eventually learned to fear creatures that could not be lied to. "Call him off," he said. "No." The answer did not echo. It landed flat and final. The mayor yanked the wheel harder. Somewhere in the lower chamber below, machinery clanked. Another lock engaging. "You think dragging the town into this solves anything?" he shouted. "By morning they'll tear each other apart over what's down here. Insurance will strip it. Federal claims will swallow the land. Nothing will belong to Black Hollow. At least with me in control, your control buried children behind a secret gate." That stopped the mayor for a second, but only for a second. Then he did what men like him always did when cornered by evidence and harm. He changed the scale of the crime and tried to drown it in abstractions. "You were gone," he said, almost spitting the words. "You left. You came back with your medals and your dog and your grief like the mountain owed you a clean place to land. Your brother was weak. He signed because weak men sign. This town would have died 20 years ago if I hadn't made hard decisions nobody else had the stomach for." The insult to his brother hit harder than the theft. Harder than the auction. Harder even than the sight of those highlighted property lines. But the retired SEAL had lived through enough uglier confrontations to know anger was only useful if it stayed on a leash. "My brother trusted his town," he said. "That wasn't weakness. That was the one thing you've spent your life punishing." The mayor gave a bitter laugh and, in the same motion, reached for the lever beside the wheel. The dog launched. Ghost crossed the remaining stair span in a white blur and struck the mayor's arm just above the wrist, not to maul, not to tear, but to stop the lever from being thrown. The force spun the man sideways into the rail. The lever snapped only halfway down. Alarms shuddered to life somewhere in the lower control bank. Red lights began to pulse along the corridor behind the soldier. Not a full shutdown then. A partial seal sequence. The mayor hit the wall and the folder slid from under the soldier's arm, papers spilling over the stair. Maps, deeds, signatures, fuel logs, all of it cascading around the mayor's boots like the physical collapse of his excuses. He looked down at the papers, then up at the soldier, and the last of his polish vanished. "You should have stayed gone," he said hoarsely. "You should have told the truth before the storm," the soldier answered. The dog stood between them on the stairs, shoulders squared, chest rising hard, one paw over the fallen lever as if pinning down the whole rotten system by sheer will. Red light washed over his white coat, turning him briefly into something almost mythic in the underground dark. The mayor saw the papers around him, the dog in front of him, the soldier above him, and made the kind of decision desperate men make when pride finally outweighs strategy. He bolted down the lower stair toward the vehicle exit. The soldier was after him instantly, but the mountain chose that second to remind both men that buried structures kept their own counsel. The half-thrown seal sequence slammed a door somewhere deeper below. Pressure shifted. A tremor ran through the stairwell. Dust burst from the ceiling. Then came a heavy grinding sound from beneath the lower exit ramp, followed by the deep ugly crack of old ice and compacted snow collapsing into an opening that had not been meant to bear tonight's stress. The mayor stumbled at the base of the stair as the floor ahead gave way into darkness. He caught the rail with both hands and hung there over a sudden jagged drop where the vehicle tunnel had partially collapsed out from under him. The snowcat exit was gone. Below it, blackness. Cold air surged up from the break. He screamed then, not from injury, but from the total naked terror of a man who had just discovered that the secret path he reserved for himself no longer existed. The soldier reached the base 2 seconds later. The dog beside him. The mayor clung to the twisted rail, boots scrabbling against concrete fragments that kept breaking away into the void. For one long beat the whole buried complex seemed to hold its breath. Then the radio on the soldier's belt crackled with the locksmith's voice from the upper shelter. "Heat's dropping again. Tell me you found him." The soldier looked down at the man hanging over the darkness, the same man who had laughed when a rusted key was thrown into slush and called worthless. The dog stepped closer to the edge, staring without sound. Above them the red alarms kept pulsing. Behind them, the papers proving everything lay scattered across the stairs. And in that suspended second, the mayor understood the final shape of justice before a single word was spoken. The town's only hope now hung in the hands of the man he had mocked, and the dog he had dismissed had become the line between rescue and the abyss. The mayor's hands were slipping. That was the first truth in the stairwell, simpler and louder than the red alarms, louder than the grinding complaint of the damaged lower tunnel, louder even than the cold air rising from the black drop beneath him. His gloves had torn at the palm seams when the rail bit into them, and every second he hung there, more concrete grit broke loose under his boots and rattled down into the darkness below without ever striking bottom where the soldier could hear it. The retired Navy SEAL stood one step above the fractured edge, breathing hard, papers from the stolen Ridge files scattered around his boots like the mountain itself had finally begun spitting the lies back out. The white German shepherd stood at his side, black tactical K9 jacket streaked with dust and snow melt, ears forward, body tight, eyes fixed on the man dangling over the void. The dog was not growling now. The time for warning had passed. The whole buried complex seemed to be waiting to see what kind of man the soldier would be when justice and mercy finally stood in the same place and demanded a choice. The mayor looked up first at the soldier, then at the dog, and his face had none of the authority left in it that had ruled town meetings, foreclosure notices, winter briefings, and public humiliations. There was only terror there. Pure, unadorned terror. "Help me!" he gasped. "Please!" The words sounded unnatural in his mouth, as though it had never been shaped there before. The soldier did not move immediately. Behind him, the radio on his belt crackled again with the locksmith's voice, strained but controlled, fighting to stay calm for the people huddled near the generator room. "Tell me you have the vent controls." "The kids are warming, but the lights keep dipping." The soldier kept his eyes on the mayor and answered without looking away. "I've got him." "Then finish it," she said, and the line went dead and static. "Finish it." The phrase hung differently underground. It did not mean kill. It meant end this. End the cold lie. End the decades of theft. End the ritual where a whole town suffered so one man could decide who deserved heat. But endings were never as clean as anger imagined them. The mayor's grip slipped half an inch. He cried out and slammed one forearm harder over the bent rail, chest scraping concrete, boots kicking at empty air. The dog took one step closer to the edge, then stopped and looked up at the soldier as if even now, even after all the hidden gates and frozen children and dying shelter rooms, the final act still belonged to the human beside him. That was the thing about loyalty. It carried you to the truth, but it did not steal your responsibility once you got there. The soldier dropped to one knee, shoved the fallen property folder aside, and stretched flat over the cracked concrete until one arm reached the mayor's wrist. The mayor clutched at him instantly, fingers digging with desperate strength. For one dangerous second both men slid forward as fresh concrete fragments snapped away beneath the ledge. The dog lunged without waiting for command, jaws closing on the back handle of the soldier's tactical pack, planting all four paws against the stair tread and throwing his weight backward. The movement saved all three of them. The soldier braced, growled through clenched teeth, and hauled while the dog held steady, every muscle in his white frame trembling under the black K9 jacket. The mayor came over the edge in a collapse of limbs, dust, and broken pride, rolling onto the stair landing coughing and gagging. He lay there on his side for a second, shaking so hard he could barely push himself up. The soldier rose more slowly. His arm burned from shoulder to wrist. The dog released the pack handle and stepped between the two men automatically, not threatening now, simply making it clear that whatever happened next would happen honestly. The mayor looked from the dog to the soldier, then to the papers on the floor, then toward the lower exit that had betrayed him. Something in his face finally broke. Not conscience. Not redemption. Just certainty. He knew the structure of his life had collapsed in the same instant the snowcat route did. He tried one last thing anyway because people like him always did. "You pull me up," he said hoarsely, forcing air into a voice that wanted to be commanding and could only manage desperate. "And you still have a chance to contain this. We can say the lower chamber was a legacy structure. We can say we discovered it tonight. We can control the story. The retired soldier looked at him for a long, quiet beat. Then he bent, lifted the spilled documents one by one, and placed them back into the folder with slow, deliberate care. Boundary amendments. Seizure recommendations. Fuel logs. Vent control schedules. Handwritten winter occupancy entries. Every page another nail in the coffin of the story the mayor wanted to keep controlling. You still think this is about the story? The soldier said. It stopped being about the story when children started freezing beneath your church. The mayor's shoulders sagged, but even then he could not stop reaching for one last defense. The town would have torn itself apart over this place. No, the soldier said. You just couldn't imagine a town surviving without kneeling to the man who hid the key. He keyed the radio again. Upper shelter, this is North Access Lower Ring. I have the documents. I have the mayor. Tell the maintenance man I need vent priority restored to full upper sector now. Static hissed. Then the locksmith answered, voice sharper now, stronger because hope had stopped being theoretical. He's on the panel. In the pause that followed, the lights in the stairwell dimmed once more. The mayor shut his eyes, maybe in fear, maybe in prayer, maybe simply because he had run out of faces to wear. Then the emergency fixtures brightened. Not much. Just enough. A deeper mechanical hum rolled through the mountain, low and steady, followed by a rush of warmer air through the vent grills along the wall. The soldier exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Above them, in the generator chamber, children would feel that heat first against their cheeks. Mothers would look up. Old men would open their eyes. People would stop bracing for death and start believing in morning. The dog heard the airflow change too. His ears flicked once, then he turned toward the upward stair. Work first. Emotion later. The soldier understood. He clipped the folder under one arm, grabbed the mayor by the coat, and hauled him to his feet. Move! The climb back through the lower sector felt longer because the crisis was shifting shape. On the way down, he had been chasing a man through the machinery of his lies. On the way back, he was bringing evidence into the light. The mayor stumbled more than once. The soldier did not steady him unless a fall would cost time. The dog ranged ahead, then circled back, always keeping both men in sight. When they reached the lower operations ring, the stocked private quarters looked uglier than before now that the evacuation above had succeeded. Warm blankets folded for the few. Medicine reserved for the chosen. Fuel separated from the people who needed it most. The soldier paused only long enough to key the radio again. Open all accessible storage to the shelter group. Water, blankets, meds, everything. Already doing it, the locksmith answered. And the people? They're asking questions. He looked at the mayor. Good. By the time they reached the generator room, the truth had outrun them. Nobody in Black Hollow was cheering. Survivors rarely cheered when the adrenaline was still too close to fear. But the room had changed. Children sat wrapped in emergency blankets against the generator wall, color returning slowly to their faces. The rescue teacher was awake now, crying quietly into both hands while one of the volunteer women held her. The two elderly sisters sat beside the photo tin box, staring at the tunnel entrance, as if it had turned religion into concrete. The deputy stood near the control panel with his arm in a sling improvised from insulation wrap, face hard and pale and fixed on the mayor the way men look at collapsed idols. The road foreman, propped up on a cot, did not speak at all when the mayor was dragged in. He only looked down at his own hands, perhaps thinking of a brother buried in a mine, perhaps of every winter afterward when he had accepted rationed hardship because no one told him there was another way. The old maintenance man was the only one who met the mayor's eyes fully. It's done, he said. The mayor did not answer. He had reached that phase of defeat where silence became the last possession left. The soldier handed the folder to the locksmith. Make sure everyone sees it in the morning. She took it carefully, as if the papers were more volatile than fuel. Morning's not enough, the deputy said. People need to know now. But the soldier shook his head. Not to protect the mayor. To protect the room. Now they need heat. Water. Sleep. Morning is for truth. Tonight is for living long enough to hear it. No one argued because he was right. That was another change the town would have to understand later. Authority sounded different when it came from service instead of control. The rest of the night passed in hard practical labor. Storage rooms were opened. Blankets handed out. Water warmed on maintenance plates. Children counted twice, then again. The teacher was checked for concussion. The laboring woman was settled in the quietest corner with the locksmith and 2 elderly volunteers beside her. The old maintenance man and the deputy took turns walking the upper corridors to make sure the damaged church line stayed stable. The foreman, stuck on the cot, still found work by assigning people to tasks in the blunt voice everyone knew from road crews and storm repairs. The mayor was seated against the wall near the operations table under watch, and no one in the room offered him comfort. They did not curse him either. Sometimes silence is a greater sentence than outrage because it means a man has already been moved outside the circle of belonging. Through it all, the dog kept moving. He checked sleeping children. He lay briefly beside the smallest rescued girl until her trembling stopped. He returned twice to the tunnel entrance, as if making sure the mountain had no more secrets to throw at them before dawn. Near morning, when the generator room had settled into that exhausted hush peculiar to places where disaster has been survived but not yet processed, the retired soldier finally sat down on an overturned supply crate near the wall. The dog came to him at once, leaned his weight against his knee, and closed his eyes for the first real rest he had allowed himself all night. The soldier put one hand on the white fur at his neck and let it stay there. Around them, people slept in coats and blankets. Above them, the storm still scraped at the mountain, but softer now, already losing the war it had nearly won. For years Black Hollow had looked at the soldier and seen absence. A man who had left. A man who came back with ghosts. A man who no longer fit. By dawn they were seeing something else. Not a savior in the grand foolish sense. Just the man who went up the ridge when everyone else stayed below. The man who opened the buried door. The man whose dog found what everyone else had been taught not to see. When morning finally arrived, it announced itself first through the vent grills as a subtle change in the quality of the air, then through the hatch corridor as pale blue light filtering down from above. The storm had broken. The old maintenance man and the deputy went first to inspect the upper access. The soldier followed with the dog, the locksmith, and a handful of stronger townspeople. Together they climbed to the ridge hatch and shouldered it open against the crusted snow packed above. Daylight spilled in, clean and freezing and honest. The mountain stood under a fresh world of white, pines bent, roads erased, Black Hollow below wrapped in the stunned beauty that only comes after a night when nature tried to take everything and failed. Smoke was rising from a few chimneys now. Rescue vehicles would not make the upper pass for hours yet, but they no longer needed rescue to survive. They had already done that themselves. The townspeople began helping one another up onto the ridge in careful groups, breathing the dawn like people returning from the dead. No one spoke much at first. Then word moved among them as they saw the hatch, the vent, the hidden markers, the proof that the mountain had been holding their stolen shelter all along. Some looked at the soldier. Some looked at the dog. Many looked back down at the town with the disorienting expression people wear when they realize the ground under their whole life has never been what they thought it was. The locksmith came up carrying the folder of documents inside her coat. The deputy followed with the mayor in cuffs improvised from utility restraints. Nobody had to stage the moment. There was no need. The sight was enough. The same man who had stood above the foreclosure auction platform the previous afternoon now climbed into daylight below the line of the people he had left to freeze. He did not look at the town. He did not look at the soldier. He looked only at the snow under his boots as if perhaps the earth itself might still open and hide him. It did not. Truth rarely grants that kindness. By midday, once county responders finally reached the lower roads, the story no one could control anymore had already spread through Black Hollow. The hidden shelter. The papers. The private lower ring. The church route. The children behind the barrier. The white shepherd who found them. The old maintenance man who confessed. The deputy who backed the evidence. The mayor who had called the key worthless, and then begged for his life over a collapsed escape tunnel. But the most important thing was not the scandal. It was what happened after. The tunnel complex was not resealed. It was turned over to the town under emergency oversight, and the first names spoken for its future were not lawyers or officials, but the names of the people who nearly died because it had been hidden. The church lot access was fully opened and reinforced. Supplies were inventoried publicly. The private lower quarters were stripped of exclusivity and folded into community shelter plans. The property seizures tied to the buried ridge infrastructure were frozen pending review, and among the first documents restored for examination were the records on the soldiers' brothers' land. By the end of the week, everyone in Black Hollow knew what would happen next even before the courts finished saying it. Some things no longer needed official language. The town had seen enough. A few days later, when the sky was clear and the snow along the ridge glittered under hard winter sun, the retired soldier stood outside the old mechanic's shed with the dog beside him and watched a pickup climb slowly up the road. The locksmith stepped out carrying a small metal box and a folded county notice. She crossed the yard without preamble and handed him the box first. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay the rusted iron key. Clean now, but not polished. Honest metal. Honest age. They logged it and released it this morning, she said. It's part of the public record now, but they said the finder could hold it until the hearings are over. He closed the box slowly. And the notice? She handed him the folded paper. Temporary injunction on the seizure status of the North Ridge parcels, including his brother's tract. It was not the end. But it was the beginning of one. He looked up at her. She smiled, tired and real. Turns out worthless things sometimes just need the right door. The dog nudged the box with his nose, then looked toward the ridge above town where the hidden hatch now stood marked with bright rescue posts instead of secrecy. Children's voices carried faintly on the wind from below. The town school had taken the older students up to help haul supplies to the newly opened refuge. One of the little girls rescued from behind the barrier had tied a red scarf around the outer rail for the dog that morning and announced with absolute certainty that he was the reason mountains could be trusted again. The soldier laughed at that quietly, because it was too large a statement, and somehow still true. He slipped the key back into its cloth, closed the box, and rested his hand on the dog's neck. Together they stood in the bright cold while Black Hollow, for the first time in many winters, began rebuilding around truth instead of fear. The mockery was gone. The lie was gone. The hidden warmth beneath the snow belonged to the people above it now. And in the end, that was the real justice of the night. Not that the corrupt man fell. Not that the papers were found. Not even that the town survived. It was that a rusted key everyone dismissed, and a white dog everyone underestimated, opened more than a buried shelter in the mountain. They opened the locked heart of a town, and gave it back to itself.